Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, Universal Mastery. So today we have a very interesting video that it is that we are going to be speaking about. This is something that is actually going to be super valuable to know more about and very important to actually understand and start working with yourself. I think there's going to be a lot of people that tune into this that are also going to be in resonance very deeply with this subject that it is that we're talking about. So what we're talking about is if you find yourself getting stuck in unhealthy cycles, what is it that you do? What is it that you need to know? And what is a general perspective that I can share with you to allow you to shift your own perspective on what is currently taking place in your life and give you an angle to look at what is truly happening. So if you find yourself getting stuck in these toxic states of being or these unhealthy forms of coping mechanisms, and you find yourself continuously going into it, and you can't seem to understand it. Why am I doing this? Why do I keep making this decision to take this action, to behave in this way, to get into this relationship with something that I know is not good for me, with something that I know I'm wanting to be able to let go of? So this is exactly what it is that we're going to be speaking about in our today's video. This is going to be important information to really sit with and to understand. So if this is something that you resonate with and you want to know more about it, then I highly recommend you stay tuned, and I will see you on the other side. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. So we're talking about, what do you do when you find yourself getting stuck in these unhealthy behavior patterns, in these unhealthy attachments? You keep making these decisions that you know you really don't want to be making over and over and over again, to the point where you feel like you're hitting a threshold. You feel like you're hitting a brick wall, and you keep banging your head into it over and over and over again. What do you do if you're someone who's experiencing this? Why is it that you keep doing this? And what is the potential that you actually truly do have in front of you that maybe you're a little bit afraid of? All right. So the first thing that we want to start with is we want to start with some form of acknowledgement and some form of validation for that type of pain and that type of suffering. So for anyone that finds themselves attached to these unhealthy cycles, and the more conscious of it you become, the more painful it becomes simultaneously. For anyone that's in that, the first place we want to start with is, you're not a bad person. You're not so far gone that you can't recover. You're not weird, crazy, once again, too broken. It's actually very common, and it's very natural for us as humans to experiment with some of these different cycles. And of course, the more conscious and aware we become of these cycles that we find ourselves falling into, the more it's going to amplify some of the pain and some of the negative cause and effect from making that decision that separates us from our authentic self. So once again, this is a learning lesson. This is not something that you've gone too far with and you can't recover, you can't come back. This is something that you have to understand where you are now. You have to become aware of that. You have to find some form of acceptance for this unhealthy cycle that keeps playing out in your life. And you have to start a process of realizing, why is it that you keep shifting into this cycle? Why is it that you keep making this decision that you know is not truly in your best interest? And this is what I'm going to help you better understand in this today's video. So let's go into it. So once again, first place we're starting with is realizing you're a human being. You're going to make mistakes. It is not the end of the world if you keep falling into these unhealthy patterns. If you relapse on drugs, if you get into these unhealthy relationships over and over again when you know it's not for you. You know, when you keep protecting yourself by behaving in a way where you know you're masking authentic feelings underneath. You're a human being. As humans, we do this. You know, there are consequences to this when it comes to cause and effect, but through that, there is learning. There is healing that can take place. There is a deeper understanding that you can have with yourself from making these decisions and going into these cycles. Of course, the goal is we want to work with our authenticity and we want to shift out of these things and we want to start living in a way that allows us to not abandon ourselves and allows us to be more grounded in who we truly are, so we can keep building on that and building a momentum with that. That's the goal. But sometimes we need that pain and that suffering of that cycle to fully be able to understand where it comes from and then make that decision that we want to release it and we want to start honoring, you know, our highest self, our most authentic beingness. So, this is something that I have had a lot of personal experience with in my life. When it comes to understanding cycles and unhealthy coping mechanisms that I have had, I have seen myself continuously throughout periods of my life go into these cycles over and over and over again, even to the point where I become so conscious this is not something I want to do anymore, but I still find myself doing that, getting back into it. And then I do it, and then when I'm done, I have this immense shame and this immense guilt inside of my system. And I'm wondering, why did I just do that? Why do I keep doing this? So the building on this shame and this guilt that's underneath the surface can become this momentum of heavy, dense energy. And that's something that a lot of people aren't fully aware of when they're continuously making these decisions that, you know, are not really in your best interest. So the first place that we want to start with this, you know, tying into self-acceptance with going into these cycles, is also realizing that when we're in them, you don't want to add more shame and add more guilt than what there actually has to be. Now, it doesn't mean that that's going to completely disappear overnight, but you don't need to add fuel to that flame. You don't need to tell yourself consciously, I am a piece of shit for this. I am a bad person because I made this decision, etc. You know, you want to try your best to once again understand you're just a human and you make mistakes, and these mistakes are learning lessons, and try your best to let that go and feel through what's there with that. But I remember, like, as I've found myself at different points in my life making these decisions over and over and over again that I knew were not in my best interest, it got me to a point where I'm like, why am I doing this? Why do I keep making this decision? What's actually going on, underneath the surface for me that causes me to do this? And what I've come to find is that there's a couple things going on. Of course, this is going to be rooted in some really deep layered trauma from the past and even generational trauma. So that's always going to be the root of it. But what I've also come to find is that there's even a fear of being my most authentic self, because for so many years, I have been out of touch of that. I have lost a connection to that aspect of myself, that core. So it feels like a very big jump and a very big step into the complete unknown to start embodying more of my intuitive knowing and my instinctual guidance to honor my process. So I believe for a lot of you listening too, with the traumas that you've been through, the things that you've experienced, the protective mechanisms that you form to keep yourself safe at the cost of authenticity, I feel like there's probably a lot of fear that you have as well for the true core and potential of who you actually are, because you just don't know who that is. You don't know what that is yet. And you're learning about that every single day. So this was a big player that I've become aware of in regards to what was making it so hard to really commit to my fullest self, is the fear of the unknown, the fear of who is Jeremiah fully honoring his process, letting go of those unhealthy coping mechanisms, introducing healthier ones, making wiser decisions, being more vulnerable and being so much more in tune with the body's sensations and feelings, and not having to attach to certain masks of survival and protection. I had to come to terms with this, but it's really good to be able to recognize these things. And I'm thankful that I was able to see this, because it gives me more room to say, you know what? I can step into the unknown in a much more vulnerable way now. I can be, more able and willing to feel the things that it is that I'm truly needing to feel inside of my system. And that's important. Okay? Now, with that as well, with these, unhealthy cycles that we find ourselves stuck in, we also want to understand that when we are starting to open up deeper layers of our unconscious and we're starting to surface emotions from our nervous system, the repressed ones, the more uncomfortable ones, the heavier, the dense ones, inherently following vulnerability and feeling, there are going to be, in some regards, aggravated parts of us that are going to be more so of the protector parts that are going to want to turn on or come online more, because they were formed from our trauma to keep us safe. But the way that they often keep us safe is by not feeling what's actually under the surface there. And this is, fragmentation. So when we're starting to honor more of the authentic self and the authentic path, we might notice there is a more sensitive response to some of these protector parts of us that are going to kind of be operating in our bodies and our nervous systems, trying to get us back into old cycles or back into old patterns or back into old ways of being. So I want you to think of like a program, and how a program, once it runs, it has its own pathway that goes through a structure that produces an outcome. So when we run this program and over and over and over, we become aware of those pathways. and we become aware of the outcome. So imagine that same example, but for the body and for the nervous system. We have these programs, neural pathways that we jump into when we're too afraid, when we're feeling too sad, when we're feeling like we're losing control. We want to jump into this wired neural pathway of a false self, a mask, because we think this is protecting us, when in reality, it's just abandoning ourself. We are abandoning ourself from actually getting to the core of what's underneath the surface. And the core of what's underneath the surface is going to be these deep, repressed, heavier emotions that are most likely from our early childhood and our families. So it's important to know this, because if you're someone that's finding yourself kind of cycling over and over again, making these decisions that you're like, I don't want to do this. Why am I doing this? And it's even to the point where you start feeling like you're possessed. Like there's people that even start saying like, I think I'm possessed. I know for me, it can feel like that too. I know it's not what it is, but it can feel like it. And in some way, maybe there's a little bit of a truth to that, because you could say you're possessed by parts of you, fragmentations of you that are just trying to keep you safe, that are just trying to protect you, but they're doing it once again at the cost of your authenticity. So it's not that this is bad. It's not that these things are evil. They want to hurt you. You need to build a new relationship with these parts of you by taking it one step at a time. Sometimes this is why it starts with self-acceptance, having self-acceptance for the cycle, for the decision that you're making that is not healthy for you. Literally, sometimes that's the first place you have to start, is just with self-acceptance. Like, you know what? I'm going to make this decision today. I'm going to drink alcohol today, even though it's not something I truly want to be doing and I know is in my best interest, but I'm aware enough to know there is a part of me that is wanting to drink this alcohol today, and it's trying to protect me from feeling something that's underneath the surface. And the pull is so strong that today I'm going to allow that to happen, and I'm going to observe this part of me. I'm going to be an observer of that part. And I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to shame it, but I am going to observe it. And I'm going to let it know from this observation and self-acceptance that I am there while it is acting in the way that it is, while it's protecting me in the way that it thinks it needs to. And the valuable thing with that is that this part of you then can start to recognize it is not the whole you. It's just a part of you. Because sometimes these fragmentations inside of our psyches and our bodies, sometimes we identify with them and we think that's who we are, or these fragments think that they are us. But they're not. They're just parts of us. We are a whole being amongst all of our parts. All of it together, grounded in the core, grounded in the center self. So once again, with that being said, this is important because we want to start with that acceptance then. We want to be that observer, and then hopefully we can get to that point where we make that commitment and say, today, I have enough self-acceptance, I have enough awareness of this decision, of this cycle, of this unhealthy coping mechanism, and today's the day that I release this. I have gone through enough pain, enough suffering, enough catalyst, enough restriction from this cycle. I'm ready to release myself from it, and I am ready to commit to my authenticity and no longer abandon who I actually am to keep jumping into this unhealthy cycle. This is the ultimate goal, and this is what we're aiming for so that we can get to this point and we can start healing at a whole new level. We can start moving again with our energy. It doesn't have to be stagnant anymore. But of course, in order to do all of this, it takes time. It's a process. This is not something you can just logically understand and then change your life like that. It's an emotional, sensational process that really does take time, and it comes in waves. So there are going to be ups and downs with that whole process. There's going to be times where you want to really commit to your most authentic self, and then you make that mistake. You go back into that cycle. But then you go in with more self-acceptance. So you're not judging yourself or shaming yourself. Whereas in the past, maybe that's immediately what you jump to, and you're accepting it. And then you're saying, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to shift. I'm going to commit to myself. And then you commit to yourself. Then you do that for a month, and then it comes back around, and then you slip back into it again. You say, you know what, I see it again. I recognize the cycle. It's familiar to me now. Tomorrow I'm going to commit to myself again, and I'm going to have acceptance for that cycle in the way that it showed up and in the way that I went into it. And then you commit to yourself again, and you go and honor your inner process, and then that cycle remanifests, and then you see it for what it is, you recognize it, and then you say, you know what, I don't want to go back into that. I'm letting it go. And you let it go. And you keep doing that as many times as you need to until your energetic resonance changes or it shifts, and you no longer really start attracting that unhealthy pattern or that unhealthy cycle into your life anymore. So for example, I used to be a weed smoker, significant weed smoker, and an alcohol drinker. So when I was smoking weed, I smoked weed for like 10 years straight, maybe even longer. I don't know. I would say probably 10 years. And I would smoke all the time. My whole life revolved around smoking weed. And during that time, I would always manifest relationships and opportunities to smoke more weed, because that was all that I really was concerned with, because it was a way that I was protecting myself. If I could just smoke weed and get around people that are smoking weed, then hopefully I can avoid my trauma. Hopefully I can avoid feeling what's actually there. I don't want to face that. So long story short, when I finally got to a point where I'm like, I don't want to smoke anymore, this is clearly affecting my life in a negative way, and I'm going through a lot of pain because of it, I made a decision to let go of it. So I did. I stopped smoking. But then next thing you know, I've got all these people that are cycling back through relationships, through opportunities, and through situations where weed is now being presented to me. I had a friend that's like, hey man, I got some weed. You want to smoke? And usually they would never hit me up. They would never hit me up and say, I got some free, some free weed. We can smoke together. It was only when I let it go and I decided that I was done with it, that then they came out and they're like, hey, I got some weed for you for the first time. And it's completely free. You want to come with me? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, is this the universe telling me that I should go and smoke? Or is there something much, much deeper at play? And obviously, as I've grown as a person, I can reflect back on those times and I can see it's this manifestation of weed coming back into my life, even in more profound ways, when I decided to stop smoking and let it go, was because the energy was still in my nervous system. It was still the resonance of that part of me that used weed to escape. So that part of me, that fragment of me, needed healing, and I needed to build a new relationship with it, and I needed to connect to my authenticity, and I needed to feel through repressed emotions and go into trauma work in order to fully release that. But it took time because I didn't know this back then. So I'm thinking people are coming to me, they're offering me free weed. I'm like, okay, the universe is giving me an opportunity to smoke again. And I went back into it, right? So that went on for some time until I finally realized I still feel like crap. I still feel like I'm losing myself. I still feel like I'm not living my most authentic self and, in alignment with who my purpose and who I am. So I was like, you know what? I got to just put this down. And it took a long time. I mean, it took a while for me to really understand what was going on and start processing through it. But eventually I released it. I mean, opportunities would come up and I would say, no, I'm good. I release it. I release it. And I just let it go. And I would feel the emotions of it. It would feel heavy. Parts of me really wanted to smoke, but I would say no. And then I did that for a while. I mean, for me, actually, I even had to move states. At the time I lived in Maryland. I ended up moving to Florida because it was too much capacity. I didn't have enough capacity to be around all these like hometown triggers and relationships because I just kept getting sucked back into it. So I moved to a whole different state where I didn't know anyone. And I basically hit a reset button on my life so I could like reconnect and everything. And you don't have to do that. But for me, that's what I did. And it did support that process for sure. But it's not, you don't have to do it that way. But long story short, after having not smoked weed in like a year and a half or 2 years, I kind of just released it from my system and realized like, this is not something that I even want to do anymore. Like I am feeling better without weed in my life. And then that feeling of feeling better without it reaffirmed to me and helped me to rewire my nervous system to not want to do it anymore. And it was like a genuine, like, I really don't want to do that anymore. Like that part of me that used to protect me by smoking the weed, I built a relationship with that part, and that part realized it didn't need to protect me in that way anymore. So it kind of changed in its function. And I changed, of course, with my understanding of myself and, you know, how I work with my parts in my system. So of course, when I authentically released it from my body, I stopped attracting it. Like I didn't really attract situations or opportunities or weird situations where weed was just always in front of me anymore. It's like it literally started dissipating from my reality because it was getting more released in my nervous system. So I share this with you because this is the power of energetic resonance and how these things work. And the only thing that you really can do is observe what's taking place and understand these mechanisms of protection and understand these parts of you that are trying to go into these cycles, these unhealthy copings, because they're just trying to protect you, but they don't know that the way they're protecting you is at the cost of your authentic self. So you have to reparent these parts. And that literally, it's not complex. It just means you have to connect back with your core. You have to start feeling what you're actually feeling. You have to be honest in that way, connecting with emotions, connecting with sensations, and letting go of the need to always make that choice, make that decision, jump into that thing that is abandoning yourself. You have to make that choice and you have to be consistent with it slowly and surely. And look, you know, with this process, there can literally come a time where, let's say you're addicted to weed and it's it's causing a lot of havoc in your life. Yeah, you got to go through a process of letting it go and releasing it from your system, but you might be able to pick up smoking weed again later down the road, like on an occasion, and it's completely a fine experience for you. It's not even a big deal because by that time you will have released so much of that trauma that was behind that protective part of you that smoked weed in such a addictive type of way. So that later down the road, you might get to a point where you can have a much healthier relationship with the weed or with the substance. And it could be just like an occasional thing. Like maybe you go out and visit someone and they offer you to smoke a little bit of weed and you decide, you know what, I feel like I'll do that today. You do it, you have a fun time, an interesting experience, a self-awareness experience with it. And then you go about your life and you don't have that urge or that craving to keep going back to it. That's a good sign that you've released it from your system. And I've experienced the same thing. Every once in a while when I visit my family out in Wisconsin, sometimes I will smoke weed when I visit my cousins. Not all the time, but sometimes I will. And it'll be like a one-time experience. It'll be like one time a year. And then when I'm done with it, I'm like, I don't have any urge to do that again. Like there's no urge for me to go find it, purchase it, get back in that like addictive pattern. It's just a fun experience at the time. And then that is what that is. So it's not the things that we're attached to or the unhealthy cycle itself. It's the relationship that we have to the things and what's under the surface that we're not wanting to face and go into that's driving these parts of us to kind of operate in these unhealthy ways. And it's our responsibility to connect to our central self and become aware of these parts and to accept these parts for who they are and what they are and why they're there, but then to reshape our relationship to these parts so that they don't have to keep controlling our system, so that we don't keep giving our power away and abandoning ourselves. You know, that's the essence. So if you're someone that is in these unhealthy patterns and cycles and you can't figure out why, take what it is that I'm sharing with you, really self-reflect on it and use it. Use it to your advantage. Be patient with yourself. Be gentle with yourself. This is a process that will take time. You're not going to get this figured out in your first week. You're not going to get it figured out in your first month. It's going to probably take you at least 3 to 6 months just to get a momentum of getting back in tune with who you actually are, being honest in that way, and then taking those little baby steps, moving you in a healthier direction. You know, shifting you into a space within yourself where you know you're making decisions that are honoring who you are. So the same way that when we make these decisions that kind of we know are not good for us and it builds up the shame and the guilt, when you make decisions that are in alignment with who you are and what you're here to do, it builds up a feeling good energy. It's like I feel satisfied at a core level because I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to. I'm doing what I'm like led to, like I'm intuitively, instinctually guided to. There's a grounding to that. And that builds a momentum within itself, but you have to give yourself time to move into that. And it will take time. So with that being said, this is going to wrap it up. If you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button, drop down in the comment section. Let me know if you resonated with any of this. I would love to hear your own personal experience with some of these subjects. Okay. You know, and if you want to get even more vulnerable with it, I would love to hear like, what are some of the things that you're currently working through in regards to your unhealthy patterns and your unhealthy coping mechanisms, and what is working for you in regards to releasing those things. Okay. Notification bell. You definitely want to hit that and get notified whenever I'm posting, because I'm posting literally every single day and you don't want to miss out. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. By subscribing, you're further going to connect to everything it is that I'm doing. Now, also, if you know someone that's going to gain value from this, copy and paste the link and send it to them. That could literally change someone's life. So if you know someone that needs to hear this, I encourage you to send it out. Now I'm going to take your awareness to the most important link within the description below. This is the Patreon. I have tons of exclusive content there, organized all in different collection sections, from everything to self-development, trauma work, education on it, shadow work, regulating the nervous system, all the way down to occultism, a magic training course for anyone that's interested in getting into occultism. Very valuable stuff over there. Okay. At tier number 3 and 4, you're gaining access to something extremely exclusive. This is a Universe B ritual service that I perform on the 29th of every single month. It is an energetic transfer from me to you as the receiving participant to support you through your development process, working through some of the deepest layers of your unconscious mind. Okay? It is very significant. There are about 300 members that actively take place in it every single month. And I have received hundreds of messages from people that have taken advantage of it and that have noticed some very significant shifts take place in their life in a positive direction to help them better honor the authentic self. All right, so if this is something that you're interested in, definitely consider it. It's all in the first link. Second link is where you can book a one-on-one call with me or jump into mentorships. This is one of the most intimate and powerful ways to personally work with me. And I would love to be able to work with you in that way. Also, in the same second link, you can book a tarot card reading with Alexia. She's a really gifted tarot card reader, so definitely take advantage of that. Third link is a LUCIFERS Foundation course. This is a course that gives you a step-by-step structure to follow to start developing a healthy relationship with the light bearer. The fourth link is my YouTube memberships. This is where you can become a part of the Universal Mastery family, and I would be more than honored to have you a part of the community in that way. And the fifth link is my book recommendations for you. So if you're looking for books to start studying when it comes to occultism and you want some tools to be able to refer back to, definitely look into that. It is going to be the fifth link below. With that being said, we're going to wrap it up here. I appreciate all of you very, very, very much. And I hope you all have an amazing rest of the day or nights, wherever you are. And I will see you in the next video. Peace.